wanted to talk to y'all fairly briefly. Try to make this quick, painless. May turn into a rant, but I wanted to talk to you about what most hunters don't recognize. They don't understand the significance of it. Many have never even heard of it. It's called the North American Model of Wildlife Management. And when Europeans landed on this continent, they came from a world where hunting was only allowed for the wealthy and influential, the aristocracy. And in that world, the kings and the elite owned the game. And the common man and the peasantry were not allowed the opportunity to hunt. They came to North America. They entered a veritable Garden of Eden. And for decades, over 100 years, to find more game, all they had to do was move west. When that happened, got into the 1860s, 1870s, we began to realize that shooting drums and wagon loads of passenger pigeons and shooting hundreds of buffalo at one stand for the hides and the tongue was not sustainable. Part of the reason the buffalo were removed is you were taking away the Native Americans' food source, and that was an indirect casualty of warfare or genocide, however you want to perceive it. I think I'm going to leave that discussion for another channel. But we had to make changes if we were going to have any wildlife left on this continent, any at least significant game animals. But you had egrets being shot for their plumage, waterfowl were being sold at markets, deer were being sold at markets, wild turkeys were being sold at markets. Passenger pigeons were driven into extinction. Their breeding system didn't allow them to withstand the level of hunting that they encountered. Wild turkeys came precariously close, as did the white-tailed deer, and the buffalo was a hair's breadth away from fading away forever. Early pioneers of conservation made steps and took steps and put themselves out there to stop it. One of the forerunners was Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot. There were too numerous to name. Aldo Leopold is the early father of wildlife management. He was also instrumental in developing a science career field to manage wildlife. The North American model consists of 7 pillars, also known as the 7 sisters. First pillar, wildlife is held in a public trust. The public trust doctrine basically says that the state and federal governments shall manage the wildlife resource for the benefit of all. In direct contradiction to that, you have privatization of public resources, which is more closely related to the European model of wildlife management. The European model, like I said, it's the king's deer. It was the aristocracy's deer and turkeys. And an example of the privatization of a public resource would be the captive deer industry, or the high fence conundrum. On one hand, you've got landowner rights. Man owns the land, he has the right to do with it what he chooses. On the other hand, wildlife is a public resource. Unfortunately, a high fence impacts the free ingress and egress of primarily deer. So, if you are a small landowner and several small properties next to you are sold to someone wealthy and influential and they have the resources to put up a high fence, you find yourself fenced out and your hunting is basically ruined. That is an impact on your opportunity to hunt and enjoy the outdoors. Privatization of a public resource. They fenced you out. The next pillar is the removal of market hunting. Anytime financial gain and livelihood is tied to a wildlife resource, that resource is doomed. Our modern day hunting industry could be somewhat aligned with this, but I would venture to say that the hunting industry, at least at the present, has probably done more good than bad to a degree. Some days the jury's out, especially when I'm having a bad turkey season and there's too many people in the woods because folks are out there pushing turkey hunting products, making videos and YouTube channels about turkey hunting. That's about I've been able to overcome it thus far, and the resource has withstood it to a degree. But market hunting and making that wildlife resource livestock to be sold and bought is severely detrimental to a wildlife resource, and that was what began, or what was one of the triggers of the first stage of exploitation. The third pillar is that wildlife shall be managed and allocated by law. So that allowed a legal precedent to be set for wildlife agencies to set seasons, set bag limits, and state agencies to manage the wildlife resources of that state for all of the citizenry. And this created the conservation officer, the wildlife officer, the game warden per se, and created hunting seasons and bag limits to sustainably harvest instead of exploit those wildlife resources. Fourth pillar, killing of wildlife is only for legitimate purposes: food, self-defense, or depredation. Depredation is that wildlife resource is eating a farmer's soybeans. Birds on an airfield, bird strikes. In the aircraft world and aviation is a serious thing. I worked in that for several years, contending with that. Wildlife depredation, wildlife damage is a portion of the model that is allowable. Self-defense from a apex predator is allowable. Harvesting for food is also acceptable. So that is the only ethical method within this model that allows the killing of wildlife. Number 5, wildlife is an international resource. Migratory Bird Treaty Act is a prime example of this. And you have migratory birds using Canada, US, and Mexico. They have to be managed with the same methodology. All 3 of the countries have to be on the same page. And that was a piece of legislation that has facilitated, at least in North America, the intelligent management of migratory birds across this continent. Pillar number 6. This is a big one. And this is part of the reason why I had a career change at one point, as wildlife policy should be based on science. It should be based on what science says is the best management of that species. And this is a biggie. And it came along later. Aldo Leopold was the father of this. But science-based wildlife policy is key to making informed and intelligent decisions, and not just a scientific wild-ass guess, which is, if we left it to the good old boys to make decisions based on what they saw riding around in a truck, that's what we would have. We have professors, we have wildlife professionals at universities and state agencies that are making good recommendations and good decisions. The caveat to this is we've also got the politically elite and influential working to, in some cases, gerrymander the rules to benefit themselves. everything from chronic wasting disease management to wildlife management area regulations. The rules can be gerrymandered to benefit the elite few still, even under our better than average wildlife management model here. Seventh pillar is the democracy of hunting and wildlife management. And we want to provide opportunity for all the citizenry of this country and of this continent to be able to enjoy their wildlife resources and their God-given right to hunt and to be outdoors. Because in my opinion, that's the only life that's really worth living. If I couldn't be out here some days like this, I don't know, it would be a pretty miserable existence. So, reflect on these 7 pillars of the North American model. Reflect on what we know about infringement upon the public trust doctrine, upon the foundation of science as the pillar of wildlife management. And we might not be able to undo all the damage that's been done, but we might be able to stop any new development. And as wildlife habitats become more fractured and fragmented across the country, and as diseases move, we're going to have to make some hard decisions, and we're going to have to make a lot of changes. But I still feel like the hunters and conservationists out there have the guts and the stomach for this battle, for this fight, because it's indeed a fight.